It's game night at the championship arena, the air thick with tension and the roar of the crowd as fighters prepare for their final bouts. The spotlight blazes down on the two competitors standing in the ring. In one corner, the cocky white fighter Conor Blake stretches with exaggerated confidence, grinning like he's already won. His sharp blue eyes meet those of his opponent, Elijah Grant, a black fighter who stands tall, his jaw clenched, the weight of the crowd's expectations pressing on him. Conor looks at Elijah, his gaze filled with disdain. "You sure you're ready for this, man? Or are you just here to make up the numbers?" he taunts, his voice carrying the charged silence of the stadium. The comment rings out like a slap in the face, a jab that hits deeper than the crowd realizes. The racial undertones are thinly veiled, but everyone's heard them. Elijah's fists tighten, his knuckles white, but he says nothing. His eyes flicker over to the crowd, the familiar faces of his family and friends waiting for him to prove himself once again. "Let's make this quick," Conor sneers, stepping into the center of the ring. The referee calls for the fight to begin. Time slows as Elijah takes a deep breath, his entire body focused. But before the first punch even lands, a sudden, violent crack breaks the tension. The sound of Elijah's fist connecting with Conor's jaw, a sharp, perfect strike. The crowd gasps. Conor's body goes limp, and he crumbles to the canvas, his eyes dazed and wide. 10 seconds. That's all it took. Elijah stands over him, his chest heaving, the sting of the fight already beginning to sink in. As the referee counts down, Elijah looks at Conor, who's still down, unable to move, and the words echo in his head. This isn't just a fight. It's a statement. The sound of boots hitting the mat echoed through the dimly lit locker room as Elijah Grant adjusted the straps on his gloves. The weight of the upcoming fight pressed against him, a suffocating anticipation that he was no stranger to. His reflection in the mirror stared back at him, tall, muscular, and focused, but the look in his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. The championship fight was just minutes away, and everything he'd fought for was on the line. He could hear the distant roar of the crowd as the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, hyping up the two fighters who would soon face off in the ring. Conor Blake, white, cocky, and brash, was already in the center of the arena, pacing around like a lion in a cage, his supporters screaming his name. The air around the arena was thick with energy, but for Elijah, it felt more like a suffocating weight. The door to the locker room creaked open, and his trainer, Marcus, stepped in, his face tight with concern. "You ready, Eli?" he asked, but there was a heaviness in his voice. They both knew what was coming. Elijah nodded, his gaze turning to the floor as he adjusted his gloves again. "I'm ready. Just don't let them break me this time." Marcus clenched his jaw but said nothing, knowing that it wasn't just the fight that Elijah was worried about. It was everything else. The stares, the whispered comments, the constant feeling that his entire career was always going to be judged through the lens of his race. Tonight wasn't just about fighting for the title. It was about proving that he belonged, that his talent wasn't some fluke. The crowd outside roared again, signaling that it was almost time. Elijah stood, his back straightening, and took one last deep breath before walking toward the entrance. But as he neared the hallway leading out to the arena, he heard the unmistakable voice of Conor Blake, loud and filled with that same arrogant confidence that always rubbed him the wrong way. "I can't believe they let you in the ring with me, man." Conor's voice cut through the air, dripping with condescension. "What are you even doing here? You're just a token fighter, aren't you? Just here to fill the quotas, huh?" Elijah froze, his hand tightening on the doorframe. A flash of anger flickered in his chest, but he swallowed it down, forcing himself to remain calm. He didn't need to let Conor see the effect of his words. He'd heard it all before. Those little jabs, those thinly veiled insults meant to remind him that his success, no matter how hard-earned, would always be tainted by his skin color. Conor's voice carried over the crowd as he continued, louder now, as if he was speaking for the benefit of the audience. "Hope you don't break a nail out there. We wouldn't want the black guy to get hurt, right?" A few people laughed in the distance, their voices like nails on a chalkboard. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. Not this again. He had hoped, for just a moment, that tonight would be different, that he would be treated like a fighter, like any other competitor. But it was clear. Conor wasn't just facing him in the ring. He was already fighting him in ways that cut deeper than punches ever could. Elijah, Marcus's voice pulled him back to reality. Don't listen to him. Focus on the fight. This is your moment. But Elijah could feel the simmering anger rising again, a dangerous fire that had always been there but never fully ignited. Conor had crossed the line. Tonight wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about proving to the world that Elijah Grant wasn't just a token fighter or a stereotype. He was a champion in his own right. And he wasn't going to let anyone define him by the color of his skin. The moment of silence stretched, thick with tension, before Elijah finally stepped out of the locker room and into the blinding spotlight of the arena. The crowd's deafening roar filled his ears, but he didn't hear it. His focus was locked on Conor Blake, who was waiting for him in the ring. Still sneering, still mouthing off, oblivious of the storm that was about to hit him. The referee signaled for them to approach the center of the ring, and Conor made the mistake of locking eyes with Elijah, his smirk never fading. "Let's see what you've got, man," he spat, his voice dripping with arrogance. But Elijah didn't respond. He just stood there, staring back with a calm that belied the fire inside him. This is it, he thought, his heartbeat steady. This is more than a fight. The bell rang, and the crowd's noise swallowed up the world. The bell's harsh clang rang out, signaling the start of the fight. The crowd's roar grew louder, an ocean of noise that threatened to swallow Elijah whole. His fists clenched as he stepped forward, the air thick with tension. His heart beat in time with the heavy thud of his boots on the mat, each step purposeful, each movement measured. This wasn't just another fight. This was the moment he would finally be seen. Conor Blake stood across from him, swaggering like the world already belonged to him. His chest puffed out in arrogance, his eyes flashing with that familiar, dismissive confidence. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. He'd already spoken his piece, belittling Elijah in front of the entire stadium. But now it was time to back it up. Elijah's breath was steady, his focus laser sharp. He didn't need to hear Conor's taunts. He'd heard them all his life, from playgrounds to gyms to every corner of the world where his worth was questioned simply because of the color of his skin. But today was different. He had been fighting his whole life for this one moment. Conor lunged forward, throwing a series of wild punches. Elijah sidestepped him effortlessly, his body flowing like water. He could feel the sting of sweat beating on his brow, but it was a familiar sensation, one that fueled him rather than distracting him. With each dodge, each shift in position, he grew more aware of the sharp contrast between them. Conor's punches were reckless, fueled by pride and underestimation. Elijah's were precise, measured, each movement a calculated response to the white-hot rage that burned inside him. "Not so fast," Conor taunted, spinning on his heel to throw another wide punch. Elijah ducked under it and stepped inside, his body close enough to feel the heat radiating off Conor. The crowd gasped as Elijah's gloved fist connected with Conor's midsection in a controlled jab. The impact was sharp, but Conor didn't flinch. Instead, he grinned even wider. "You're going to have to do better than that, Grant. You've got nothing. You're just a—" Elijah didn't give him the chance to finish. His fist shot forward in a blur of motion, landing square on Conor's jaw with a sickening crack that reverberated through the arena. The sound of bone meeting flesh was a brutal reminder of how quickly the tide could turn. For a heartbeat, everything went still. The crowd froze. The noise from the audience was muffled. The world narrowed down to just the two fighters in the center of the ring. Conor's body jerked back from the force of the punch, his eyes wide in disbelief. His legs buckled beneath him, and he dropped to the mat, unable to catch himself. There was no dramatic tumble, no recovery. It was as if his body had simply given up on him, the arrogance vanishing from his face in an instant. Elijah stood above him, chest heaving, staring down at the man who had taunted him, the man who had tried to belittle everything he'd fought for. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears, adrenaline pumping through his veins. But even amidst the chaos of the crowd's eruption, a cold, detached clarity washed over him. 10 seconds, Elijah thought. That's all it took. He had barely moved, yet he had shattered Conor's bravado with a single punch. The sting in his knuckles was all that was left of the anger, but the feeling of victory was hollow. This wasn't the way he'd imagined it. Triumphant, yes, but still Something was missing. The referee started to count, his voice cutting to the fog of Elijah's thoughts. 1, 2, 3. But it was clear from the way Connor's body lay limply on the canvas that the fight was already over. The crowd was on their feet, screaming, chanting. But Elijah remained frozen, unable to shake the weight of everything he had just proven. 5, 6, 7. The referee's voice grew louder, more insistent. But Elijah didn't need to hear the rest. He turned away from the ring, his back to the down fighter. He didn't need to bask in the moment. There was too much riding on this for him to get caught up in the fanfare. 8, 9, 10. The bell rang again, louder this time, signaling the end of the match. Elijah's fists were still clenched, his entire body rigid with tension. But the crowd's deafening cheers were nothing more than a blur in the background. The air felt thinner, the space around him suddenly too vast. The fight was over, but the real battle had only just begun. As the medical team rushed to Connor's side, Elijah caught a glimpse of his manager, Marcus, pushing his way through the crowd. Marcus's face was filled with concern, but also pride. He knew this moment had been a long time coming for Elijah, but he also knew what was about to unfold. "Elijah," Marcus called out as he approached, his voice strained. "You're going to have to deal with this." The press... He didn't finish the sentence. There was no need to. Elijah nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the chaos around him. He could feel the weight of it, the invisible chains that would soon snap around him, tightening. This was what they'd been waiting for. The moment he would slip up, the moment they would twist his success into something ugly. The media would come for him, just as they always did, twisting the truth into a narrative that served their agenda. "Get ready," Marcus said quietly. "This is just the beginning." As they made their way toward the exit, Elijah could already hear the faint sound of cameras clicking, of microphones being shoved in his face. The air outside the ring felt colder now. The excitement was fading, but the feeling of betrayal remained. He had won, but the victory tasted like ash. Elijah Grant stood in the sterile, whitewashed dressing room, staring at his reflection in the full-length mirror. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving a strange emptiness in its wake. His knuckles were raw from the impact, but it was the deep, gnawing feeling in his gut that bothered him more. There should have been joy, there should have been celebration, but instead, all he felt was a creeping dread. The door to the locker room creaked open, and Marcus stepped in, his face tight. The older man's usual confidence was muted, replaced by something closer to concern. "Elijah," Marcus began, closing the door behind him. "You did it. You knocked him out in 10 seconds. That's unheard of." He let out a shaky laugh, but it was clear the moment was lost on him. They'll be talking about that punch for years. Elijah didn't respond right away. He reached for a towel, wiping the sweat from his brow. The lights above flickered slightly as he looked down at the towel, then at the floor. He could hear the distant noise of crowds still buzzing the arena outside. The excitement was palpable, but it felt miles away. "Yeah, I guess," Elijah muttered, his voice hollow. He flexed his fingers, feeling the ache in them, but it wasn't the physical pain that lingered. It was the sting of something deeper, the realization that the victory he just earned would be tainted. The media would twist it, the fans would ignore it, and in the end, he would still be just another black man, trying to prove his worth in a system built against him. Marcus set a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you? The backlash." Elijah turned his head, meeting his trainer's gaze. He didn't need to say it out loud. Marcus had been with him through every fight, every moment of doubt, every racial slight that Elijah had faced in the fight world. It wasn't new, but it was still exhausting. "It's not just a fight," Elijah replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the way they're going to spin it, the way they always do." Marcus frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You heard him, Marcus. Token fighter, black guy with anger issues," Elijah said, his voice growing sharper with each word. "They're going to call me an anomaly, not a champion. They'll never see me as someone who earned this." Marcus didn't reply immediately. He stepped back and crossed his arms, staring at the floor. Elijah's words hung heavy in the air. He knew what his fighter was saying was true. Elijah's victory wouldn't be celebrated the way it should be. No, it would be reduced to some simple stereotype. The media would have a field day with it. His race would overshadow everything. Suddenly, the door burst open again. A reporter, microphone in hand, stood in the doorway, followed by a few camera operators, their lenses already pointed at Elijah. Elijah Grant, the man who just made history with the fastest knockout in the championship fight. The reporter said with a wide, professional smile, "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Elijah sighed, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He knew what was coming. He wasn't naive. He stood up on the bench where he'd been sitting and turned toward the reporter. "Sure," Elijah said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "Go ahead." The reporter's smile faltered, sensing Elijah's cool demeanor, but pressed on. "How does it feel to knock out such a dominant opponent in less than 10 seconds? Some are saying that your win was, well, unexpected." Elijah's eyes narrowed as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Unexpected," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I trained for this my whole life. No, I didn't expect it. I earned it." The reporter hesitated, then adjusted his approach. "Right, of course. But some might say your intensity in the ring was a bit much, don't you think? Some have called it anger. Are you concerned that your emotions might be getting the better of you?" The question stung, but Elijah had heard it all before. The reporter's subtle implication that black athletes were always on the edge, always too emotional, always too aggressive, no matter how measured their actions. He took a breath, keeping his gaze locked on the reporter. "No," he said quietly. "What's getting the better of me is the system that's designed to hold people like me back. The system that calls a victory unexpected just because I'm black. That's what's getting the better of me." The reporter blinked, thrown off by Elijah's calm but pointed response. He wasn't expecting this level of confrontation, but Elijah wasn't about to let this moment slip away without speaking his truth. The awkward silence stretched for a moment before the reporter pushed ahead, clearly uncomfortable. "Right, of course. Just trying to get your thoughts, for the fans." The word fans left a bitter taste in Elijah's mouth. Fans who cheered when he won but would forget about him the second a new controversy came up. Fans who praised his skills but reduced him to a stereotype the moment they thought they could. Marcus's voice cut through the tension. "You've got your answers. Time to go, gentlemen." The reporter opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Marcus stepped forward, blocking his path. "The kid's been through enough. We'll talk later." With a final, awkward pause, the reporter backed out of the room, and the door clicked shut behind him. Elijah exhaled, the weight of the exchange sinking deep into his chest. He didn't need to say it out loud, but Marcus could see it in his eyes. Elijah wasn't just fighting for a title. He was fighting for his very humanity, and it felt like the world was watching, waiting for him to slip up. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly. Elijah nodded, though the look on his face said otherwise. "I don't know anymore. I'm tired of having to prove myself. I'm tired of being the black guy who made it." Marcus let out a sigh, sitting down beside him. "You'll get through this. We've fought harder battles before. This is just another fight." But Elijah wasn't so sure. The weight of everything that had come before this victory, and everything that was still to come, was pressing down on him. The fight was far from over, and he knew it. The days following the fight felt like an endless barrage of headlines, tweets, and broadcast segments, each one twisting Elijah's victory into something he could hardly recognize. His knockout of Connor Blake, which had taken just 10 seconds, was no longer just a moment of triumph. It had become a battleground for everyone with an opinion on race, class, and identity. It started with the sports channels. The headlines screamed about Elijah's unexpected victory, but it wasn't the knockout they were focusing on. It was his demeanor in the ring, his anger, his intensity, as if his skill, his precision, and his hard work had nothing to do with his success. No, his win was framed as something uncontrollable, something dangerous, a fluke. A moment of violence. The moment of victory had been twisted into something ugly. In a commentary segment that went viral, a popular sports pundit had laughed as he described the fight. "It's no surprise that a guy like him would lose control like that. They always do, don't they? Just A matter of time before the temper flares. Elijah sat in his apartment, watching the segment on his phone, his fingers gripping the edges of the screen so tightly his knuckles turned white. His stomach churned with a mix of anger and helplessness. Just a matter of time. Those words echoed in his head like a drumbeat. This wasn't about the fight. This wasn't even about Connor. It was about something much deeper. It was about the way they saw him. Always a hair's breadth away from becoming the angry black man, the stereotype that they expected him to fulfill, no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he proved. He tossed the phone onto the couch and leaned back, rubbing his face. Why was it always like this? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Elijah stood up and opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, his face grim. Elijah didn't need to ask what it was about. More of the same? Elijah asked, his voice heavy. Marcus nodded. You're trending on social media right now. Some of it's good, but mostly it's bad. People are calling you violent, out of control. Elijah felt his heart sink, but it was a clean punch. He didn't even see it coming. How the hell is it violent? I know, but you know how they spin it, Marcus said. It's never about what you did. It's about what they want to see you do. And the way they see you, it's like they're just waiting for you to screw up, waiting for you to confirm every stereotype. Elijah closed his eyes. It wasn't news. He had known from the start that the victory wouldn't bring the kind of recognition it should have. Instead, it would stir up the usual narrative. The media would turn him into a villain if they had to. They were never going to let him be just a fighter. They're twisting everything, Elijah muttered. The knockout, the way I moved, they're all making it seem like I'm some kind of ticking time bomb. I know, man, Marcus replied, shaking his head. And what kills me is they don't see the work you put in. All they see is a black man who finally snapped. And the worst part is, the more they talk about it, the more people believe it. They've already got their narrative. Elijah's fist clenched. He wanted to scream, to throw something, but he forced himself to calm down. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let them break him. Not now. Have you seen what's being said on Twitter? Marcus asked, his voice tinged with frustration. It's disgusting. Elijah nodded, turned to pick up his phone again, scanning through a barrage of posts. Some of it was mild. Man, that knockout was insane, and Elijah's got some serious power. But beneath the surface, the same words kept repeating. Too much anger, uncontrolled. It's what we expect from someone like him. Look at this one, Elijah muttered, tapping a tweet that had nearly 50,000 likes. What a disgrace. If this was a white guy, they'd call him a fighter of the century. But a black guy, they'll say he's a danger to society. The word struck him like a slap to the face. It was all true. Elijah knew that no matter how talented he was, no matter how many records he broke, there would always be that undercurrent of racial bias that he couldn't escape. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. You have to understand, they're not just talking about your fight. They're talking about who they think you are. And that's the real battle. Elijah stared at the screen, his jaw tight, a deep sense of frustration rising in his chest. He was being framed, yet again, as a threat. His success, his strength, his power, it was all being used against him. The very things that made him a champion were the things they feared the most. I'm so tired of this, Elijah whispered, shaking his head. Tired of having to prove myself all the time. Tired of being judged based on the color of my skin instead of what I do. I know, Marcus said, his voice soft, but you can't let them drag you down. You're more than what they say you are. You got to keep pushing, keep proving them wrong. Elijah took a deep breath, forcing himself to steady his emotions. Marcus was right. He couldn't let this define him. This was bigger than one fight. This was about a lifetime of proving his worth, about standing tall despite the weight of everything trying to pull him down. Yeah, Elijah muttered, looking at the phone one more time. I'm done letting them control the narrative. I'm going to make sure they see who I really am. Later that night, after the world had shifted its focus to the latest scandal, Elijah sat alone, scrolling through a series of messages on his phone. Most congratulatory, others a mix of well-meaning but patronizing praise. His eyes landed on one in particular, from a longtime friend who had been silent throughout the chaos. I hope you're holding up okay. You're stronger than they'll ever realize. Don't let them break you. Elijah smiled, a small but genuine smile. He wasn't going to break. Not now. Not ever. The days bled into each other, the constant media noise fading into background as Elijah tried to focus on what truly mattered. The upcoming fight rematch. Connor Blake's camp had filed an appeal, claiming that Elijah's knockout was illegal, that it was too forceful for a sanctioned bout, that Connor had been hit in a vulnerable area. Things that didn't make sense to anyone who had actually watched the fight. It was a desperate move, but one Elijah knew had to be taken seriously. Marcus kept him in the gym, pushing him harder than ever. Don't let them get in your head, Eli. Focus. You've worked for this. But as the rematch approached, things outside the ring began to get much darker. The first sign of trouble came early in the morning when Elijah woke to an anonymous email on his phone. It was simple, a black and white photo of his parents' house, taken from across the street. The subject line read, "You won't win, no matter what you do." Elijah's stomach twisted as he read it, his blood running cold. This wasn't just about the fight anymore. This was personal. Someone somewhere had been watching him, and not just him, but his family. The threat was subtle, but clear. He called Marcus immediately. "I got an email, a photo of my parents' place. Someone's watching me." Marcus's voice crackled through the phone, a tone of concern threading through his words. "Shit, Eli, that's bad. We'll call the police, get them involved. But you need to be careful. This is what they do. They use fear to control you, to get you to back down." "I won't back down," Elijah said, his voice hardening. "But this is more than just some social media hate. Someone's making it real." The image stayed with him all day, its sharp focus, the coldness of the message. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to intimidate him, but this felt different. It wasn't just a threat against his career. This was an attempt to scare him into submission. By the time he reached the gym, the unsettling feeling had only deepened. Marcus was waiting for him in the locker room when he arrived. "You need to stay focused," Marcus repeated, his expression tight. "We can't let this distract you." "I'm fine," Elijah said, forcing a tight smile. He wasn't fine. Every glance over his shoulder, every distant rustling, every knock at his door. It was all amplified now. His anxiety buzzed under his skin, a constant hum that wouldn't go away. Just as Elijah was about to pull on his gloves, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message came from an unknown number. His heart sank as he saw the text. "You're not the hero here. You're just the angry black man who got lucky. Stay in your lane, or we'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." It was one of those veiled threats that made Elijah's blood boil. But there was something more sinister lurking behind the words. The suggestion, the promise, that they would expose something hidden. His mind raced. What could they possibly know about him? What could they use against him? He had worked hard to keep his life private, to protect his family and those he loved. But whoever was behind these messages clearly had some leverage. Marcus looked over Elijah's shoulder at the phone screen, his face turning grim. Someone's digging into your life, and they're not going to stop until they find something they can use to bring you down. Elijah gripped the phone in his hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "I'm not going to let them win," he said, but the doubt lingered in his voice. "I know you're not, but this is different. They know you've got more to lose now. They won't stop until they see you fall." The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Elijah was constantly looking over his shoulder, double-checking his locks, taking different routes to training. The pressure was mounting. The media stories intensified. More taunts, more questioning of his temper, more sensationalism around his victory. But underneath it all, the fear of the unknown threat gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about him being a fighter anymore. It was about something deeper, something far more dangerous. They were trying to break him from the inside out, using fear, intimidation, anything they could. They weren't just targeting his career. They were targeting his identity. One night, just as he was finishing a late-night training session, Elijah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail. His breath caught as he pressed play. It was a woman's voice, low and cold. "We know where your sister lives. We know where your mother works. This could all end for you in a second. Don't push us." The hair on the back of Elijah's neck stood up, his mind racing. His family. They were going after his family now. The line between his career and his personal life had been crossed. It wasn't just about the rematch anymore. They were using everything in their power to break him, to destroy everything he cared about. Elijah didn't wait to hear the rest of the message. He hung up immediately and dialed Marcus's number. "They're going after my family," he said, his voice tight with fury. "This has gone too far." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "We've got to go to the cops." "Elijah, this is real. They're not playing around anymore." Elijah nodded, his mind already working through the steps. "I'll make the call," he said. "But Marcus, I need you to be there. I need you to help me through this." "Always," Marcus replied. "We'll get through this, but we have to play it smart." Elijah stared out the window of his apartment, the city lights flickering in the distance. His breath came fast, his chest tight with the pressure of it all. The people behind these threats, they weren't just trying to break him physically. They were trying to break his spirit, to make him feel small, helpless. But they were wrong. He wasn't small. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't going to let anyone take away what he had fought so hard to achieve. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Cameras flashed from every angle, capturing the moment as if it were another spectacle, another opportunity for the world to watch Elijah Grant stand trial, not just for the knockout that had made headlines, but for everything he represented. The gavel struck, echoing in the silence of the room. Elijah felt the weight of it more than anyone, the finality of it reverberating through his body. He could feel the stares of the gallery on him, the judgment in the eyes of the crowd that wasn't there for justice, but for drama. "This court is called to order," the judge's voice boomed. His tone was neutral, his gaze briefly flicking over the room before settling on Elijah. "We are here to determine the validity of the actions taken during the fight between Elijah Grant and Connor Blake. The defense will now present its case." Elijah's heart thudded in his chest as he sat at the defendant's table. The room felt colder than it had a moment ago. His lawyer, Tasha Rivers, was beside him, flipping through her notes with a quiet intensity. Tasha had been with him since the beginning, a black woman with sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude, but even she couldn't hide the exhaustion creeping into her features. The case had stretched on for weeks, each day a new battle, against the system, against the media, and now, against the very people who were supposed to offer him a fair hearing. Elijah's thoughts were interrupted as the prosecutor stood up, a tall, stern-looking man with a crisp suit. He strode to the front of the room, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, what we have here is a case of extreme physical aggression," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "The defendant, Elijah Grant, intentionally struck Mr. Blake with excessive force, resulting in an injury that ended the match in mere seconds. Now, while I recognize Mr. Grant's previous achievements in sport, I must argue that the speed and violence with which he acted in the ring were unnecessary and constitute a violation of boxing regulations." Elijah clenched his fists under the table, feeling the blood rush to his temples. The prosecutor's words were like daggers, calculated, deliberate, and laced with that same undercurrent of racism that had tainted everything about the fight from the start. This wasn't about the fight. This was about labeling him, marking him as dangerous, as someone who couldn't control himself, who wasn't worthy of respect. "We are not here to discuss Mr. Blake's injuries, Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, his voice now softer but more insidious. "What we are here to address is the clear and present danger that Mr. Grant represents, not just in the ring, but as a public figure. We've seen his violent tendencies before. His behavior is consistent with that of a person who can't keep his emotions in check, who lets his rage take control. His actions tonight are indicative of a pattern that society has long tried to suppress." Elijah felt the bile rise in his throat. He had heard these arguments before, read them in the papers, heard them whispered in interviews. But hearing them in this setting, here, where his very character was being questioned, was something else entirely. They weren't just accusing him of breaking the rules of boxing. They were accusing him of being an uncontrollable threat, an animal, a stereotype that had been imposed upon him long before he ever set foot in the ring. Tasha stood, her voice calm but unwavering. Your Honor, what we are witnessing here is not a case of violent aggression. We are witnessing a case of systemic bias. The defendant, Mr. Grant, has worked his entire life to get to this point. Every punch he's thrown has been measured, calculated, and practiced. What we saw in that ring was a fighter doing his job, not a man losing control. She paused, her gaze steady as she met the prosecutor's eyes. The suggestion that Mr. Grant's actions were violent, that they were out of control, is a reflection of the very bias that we are here to address. The idea that a black man can't win fairly, that his success is always tainted by something darker. It's the same racialized narrative we've seen time and time again. Elijah felt a small spark of hope flicker within him, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of the courtroom, the cameras, and the eyes of the public who were eager to see him fall. The prosecutor's voice rose again. The issue here is not whether Mr. Grant's punch was legal, but whether his presence in the sport is a danger to the integrity of the sport itself. We must ask ourselves, should a man like this, who has demonstrated a pattern of aggression, be allowed to continue in the ring, representing this country, representing the sport? The question hung in the air like a toxin, poisoning the atmosphere. Elijah's chest tightened as the prosecutor's words sunk in. The man was attempting to demonize him, to portray his very existence as a threat to the sport. But it wasn't just the sport he was attacking. It was Elijah's very right to be here, to be seen as a legitimate contender. The judge's gavel came down sharply, cutting through the tension. We will take a short recess. You may all stand. As the court stood and the murmurs began to fill the room, Elijah turned to Tasha. Her face was set, but there was something in her eyes, something deep that betrayed her frustration. This isn't just about the fight, Elijah said, his voice low. This is about everything. About who I am, who they think I am. It's like they've already decided I'm guilty. Before I even stepped into the ring. Tasha nodded, her jaw tight. I know, but we can't let them control the narrative. We have the facts on our side. Elijah, we have the truth. And that's what's going to win this. I'm not sure that's enough anymore, Elijah muttered, his hands trembling slightly. They don't care about the truth. They care about what they've already decided. Tasha leaned in, her voice fierce. Then we'll change what they've decided. You fought too hard to let them win now. This is just one more round, and you're going to win it. Elijah took a deep breath, letting the calm of her words wash over him. He had to keep fighting, not just for his career, but for his dignity, for his family, for everything that was at stake. When the recess ended and the courtroom fell silent once more, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over yet, but he wasn't going to let them take this from him. Not now, not ever. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. Each day that passed made the weight of the situation heavier, the air more suffocating. Elijah sat at the defendant's table, his hands clenched into fists, barely able to look at the lawyers who were working furiously to clear his name. Every word, every moment felt like a battle for his existence, his right to be seen as more than just a threat, more than just another angry black man in a world that never wanted him to succeed. The trial had been dragging on for weeks, and Elijah could feel the emotional toll it was taking on him. The media coverage had been relentless. Despite the legal arguments in his favor, the public continued to twist the narrative. To them, his knockout was an anomaly. To them, he was a walking stereotype, violent, unpredictable, dangerous. But today, something felt different. The air in the courtroom had shifted. The press was more aggressive than ever, the cameras flashing incessantly as if they had already decided the verdict, as if they were simply waiting for Elijah to fall. Tasha sat beside him, flipping through her notes with steady hand, but even she seemed on edge. Elijah could sense it. Something was off. There was an unease in the way the other side was pushing its case, in the way the judge's eyes kept flicking over to the opposing counsel, like he was already leaning toward a decision. It was too much, too fast. Elijah glanced around the courtroom. Then his eyes fell on someone he hadn't expected to see, the face of his manager, Marcus, sitting in the back, arms crossed. Marcus's eyes were fixed on proceedings, but there was something in his posture, a certain stiffness, that struck Elijah. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. As the session broke for lunch, Elijah stood up, his body heavy from the emotional exhaustion of the last few weeks. He needed to step outside, clear his head for a moment. He started walking toward the exit when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Marcus. "Elijah," Marcus said, his voice low, almost too casual. "We need to talk." Elijah looked at him, his mind racing. He hadn't seen Marcus this uneasy in a long time. "What's going on?" he asked, the concern slipping into his tone before he could stop it. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned toward a quieter corner of the hallway, away from the prying eyes of the press and public. As they reached a secluded area, Marcus turned to him, his eyes darting around as if ensuring no one could hear. His voice dropped even lower, barely audible. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "Something that's going to be hard for you to hear." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's face was clouded, the lines of stress deepening around his eyes. He hesitated, then let out a long, slow breath. "The other side, they've got leverage, and they're using it against us." Elijah's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, leverage?" "They know about your past, Eli," Marcus said, his voice laced with regret. "They found things you thought were buried. They've got information about your family. They've got a file, and they're threatening to release it if you don't settle. If you don't agree to take a smaller deal, if you don't back down from this fight." Elijah felt as if the ground beneath him had just disappeared. His mind raced, his thoughts spiraling. What kind of information? Marcus's eyes flickered toward the hallway, and his voice dropped even further. "They've got your father's old arrest record, and they've got things about your sister. I don't know the details, but it's ugly. They're going to make it public, and they'll destroy you with it. Not just your career. They'll tear your family apart." Elijah's breath hitched in his throat. His father's past, the one he had worked so hard to move beyond, had come back to haunt him. The mistakes, the regrets, the things no one was supposed to know about. And now, they were being used as a weapon against him. His sister, too. She had nothing to do with this fight, nothing to do with his career, but they were dragging her into it as well. "No," Elijah whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, they can't." "They can," Marcus interrupted. "They've got all of it. They're threatening to bring it into the courtroom, and once it's out there, it'll be everywhere. And that's what they'll use to paint you as the violent black man they want you to be. They'll destroy everything you built." Elijah's world began to narrow, his body going cold. His mind was a storm of disbelief and anger. How could this be happening? How could his manager, his friend, his ally, not have warned him sooner? Why had Marcus told him about the threats before? "Marcus, you knew about this?" Elijah's voice was raw, the betrayal starting to sink in. "You knew and you didn't tell me?" Marcus's eyes fell to the floor, his face contorted in guilt. "I didn't know how to say it, Eli. I didn't want to add to everything else. I wanted to keep you focused on the fight, but..." "On the fight?" Elijah cut him off, his voice rising. "You knew they were playing dirty this whole time, and you didn't think I should know?" Marcus stepped back, visibly shaken. "I didn't want you distracted, man. I thought you could get through this without them dragging your past into it." Elijah's anger surged, his fists tightening at his sides. "You thought I could get through this? You think I'm supposed to just sit here and take it? Take whatever they throw at me?" "Eli..." "No!" Elijah shouted, stepping forward, his voice breaking as he fought to control the raw fury inside him. "You should have told me. You should have warned me. This isn't just about the fight. This is about everything they've been trying to do to me my whole damn life." The words hung in the air like a bombshell, the heat of the confrontation making it feel like the room was closing in. Marcus opened his mouth to say something, but Elijah was already shaking his head, turning away from him. "I don't need this," Elijah muttered, the hurt and betrayal spilling out of him. "I've been fighting my whole life, and I thought you were with me, but I guess I was wrong." He stormed off down the hallway, Marcus calling his name in vain. Elijah's breath came fast, his head spinning, his heart racing. The weight of the betrayal was more than he could carry. And as much as he wanted to keep pushing forward, to focus on a fight in his future, the truth had hit him like a wrecking ball. The people closest to him, the ones he trusted, had just thrown him into the fire. And now, everything he had fought for was at risk of burning to the ground. The days following his confrontation with Marcus had been a blur, each moment stretching on longer than the last. Elijah had always known that there would be trials in his career. He'd been prepared for physical toll, the grueling training, the pressures of the spotlight. But he'd never anticipated that the real fight would come from those closest to him. The betrayal still stung, the way Marcus had withheld the truth, the way his trust had been used as a pawn in a game Elijah hadn't agreed to play. Now, it wasn't just the fight, the court case, or the public scrutiny that weighed on him. It was the uncertainty of everything. How could he trust anyone when the very people who should have been his support were the ones keeping secrets? Elijah had started taking long walks at night, when the city was quiet and the world felt far away. The streets were empty, the neon signs casting pale light across his path. It gave him some semblance of peace, even if it didn't last long. He was constantly scanning his surroundings, his mind racing with the possibilities of what might come next. That night, he found himself standing outside the gym, staring at the front door. It was where he'd spent countless hours, training, working, pushing himself beyond the limits. But now it seemed like a place that had betrayed him as much as the people around him. Eli. The voice that called out his name was familiar, warm, and always a comfort. He turned to see Tasha approaching, her step steady, her expression unreadable. She had been quiet these past few days, more silent than usual, as if even she didn't know what to say anymore. "I didn't think I'd find you here," Tasha said, standing a few feet away, giving him space. Elijah didn't say anything for a long moment, his eyes scanning the darkened street. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy. "I can't do this anymore, Tasha. I can't keep fighting like this." Her gaze softened, and she took a small step forward. "You're exhausted. I get it, but you're not alone in this." "I am alone in this," Elijah said bitterly, shaking his head. "Marcus, he lied to me. He knew everything about the threats, everything about my family, and he never told me. He kept it from me like it was some kind of secret I didn't need to know." His voice cracked, the weight of his emotions catching him off guard. "How can I trust anyone now? How can I keep fighting when the people closest to me are the ones betraying me?" Tasha didn't answer right away. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I know it feels like you've been let down, but you haven't been abandoned. Marcus messed up, Eli, but he didn't do it out of malice. He did it because he was trying to protect you, even if he went about it the wrong way." Elijah turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Protect me? By keeping the truth from me? By letting me walk into this mess blind?" She stepped closer, her voice firm but gentle. "I don't know what his reasons were, but I do know this. Marcus has always had your back. He made a mistake. He shouldn't have kept you in the dark, but he wasn't trying to hurt you. He didn't think it would get this bad, and now he's scared too." Elijah's fist tightened. He couldn't let go of the betrayal. He couldn't understand how Marcus, someone who had been with him through every fight, every step of his journey, could have kept such a massive secret from him. What else was he hiding? "I don't know if I can forgive him," Elijah muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't go back to how things were. I'm tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the one everyone expects to stand strong. I'm only human." Tasha stood there, watching him carefully. Then, slowly, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Eli. You don't have to carry it all on your own. You've been carrying everyone else for so long. You don't owe anyone this burden, not like this. If you need a break, take it. If you need to fight, fight. But whatever you do, you don't do it because you think you have to prove something to everyone else. You do it for you, for your family, for what matters." Her words cut through him, sharper than any punch he had ever taken in the ring. Elijah felt something inside him crack, a piece of him that had been locked away for so long. His vulnerability, his fear, his humanity. He had been fighting not just for respect, but for approval, for validation that his place in the world was earned and deserved. But the more he fought, the more he lost sight of himself. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Elijah said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to keep doing it if it breaks you," Tasha said. "But if you want to keep fighting, I'm right here with you, every step of the way." For the first time in weeks, Elijah felt the weight on his chest lighten just a fraction. He wasn't alone in this. Tasha hadn't abandoned him. She wasn't letting him go down this road alone. And Marcus, as much as Elijah resented him, was still part of his corner. Even if the trust between them was fractured, the fight wasn't over yet. Elijah finally met Tasha's eyes, his voice steadying. "I'll fight. Not for them. Not for the media. Not for the system. I'm fighting for my own future, for my family, and for everything they've tried to take from me." Tasha smiled, her hand giving his shoulder a firm squeeze. "That's all that matters." Elijah stood up straight, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The path ahead was unclear, and the battle wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, he knew what he had to do. He had to fight, not because it was expected, not because of any external pressure, but because it was the only way to reclaim everything that had been stripped from him. The weight of the world might have been on his shoulders, but he wasn't going to let it break him. Not now. Not ever. The day of the rematch had arrived. The arena was a battlefield, the air thick with the same tension that had been building for weeks. Elijah's name echoed to the rafters, his heart beating in time with the crowd's fevered anticipation. This wasn't just another fight. It was a culmination of everything he had fought for, everything he had suffered. He stood in front of the locker room mirror, staring at himself, his reflection flickering in the dim light. His hands were wrapped tightly, his gloves hanging at his sides, but his mind wasn't focused on the physical preparation. It was the emotional weight that was suffocating him. The betrayal from Marcus still lingered, though the anger had dulled into a quiet sadness. The threats against his family had become a constant hum in the back of his mind. And the media, with its insidious narrative of the violent black man, continued to pour gasoline on the fire. But as the minutes ticked by, something inside him began to harden, the layers of doubt and fear being replaced by something else, something stronger. This wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about surviving it, about showing the world that he wasn't just a punchline of their joke. He was a champion, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. The door to the locker room opened, and Marcus stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Elijah," Marcus said, his voice low. "You ready?" Elijah didn't look at him. "I'm ready." The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them spoke of it. Not yet. Not here. Marcus walked closer, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You've got this," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "This fight, this is yours. It's about your future, your family. You've earned this." For a moment, Elijah met his gaze, his heart pounding with everything that had led up to this moment. The fights, the betrayals, the struggle to stay focused on what truly mattered. "Let's get over with," Elijah said finally, his voice steady. Outside the locker room, the roar of the crowd was deafening. The lights of the arena flickered in the distance as Elijah made his way down the hallway to the entrance. His footsteps were loud in the quiet, each step carrying him closer to the ring, closer to his fate. His heart raced, the adrenaline building with each breath. He could hear his name being chanted as he stepped into the spotlight, the noise of the crowd reaching crescendo. The arena was a living, breathing entity, its collective gaze fixed solely on him. But Elijah was no longer just a fighter. He was something more. He was a resistance. He was a message to everyone who had ever doubted him. Connor Blake stood across the ring, his jaw set in that familiar cocky grin, his eyes focused on Elijah with a sense of superiority that Elijah could feel across the distance. Connor was everything Elijah had come to hate, arrogant, dismissive, and blind to the way of the world outside his own little bubble. But today, that bubble would burst. The bell rang and the fight began. Connor came out swinging, as expected, reckless, overconfident, throwing wild punches with little regard for technique. Elijah sidestepped with practiced ease, his body moving fluidly in a way that seemed effortless. He wasn't here to fight with anger. He was here to fight with purpose. Elijah countered quickly, his fist landing square on Connor's jaw, snapping his head back. The crowd gasped, but Connor wasn't fazed. He came at Elijah again, throwing another wild hook. But this time, Elijah was ready. Elijah's victory had barely sunk in before the media circus began. The press descended like vultures, hungry for every last detail, every soundbite that could twist the narrative in their favor. It had always been like this, but now it felt different. The fight was over, but the real battle was just beginning. As Elijah stood outside the arena, the cold air biting at his skin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at stake than just his career. His eyes scanned the horizon, the city lights flickering in the distance, a reminder of everything he had worked for. He had fought for this moment, but now, in the aftermath, he was left to piece together what it all meant. Tasha walked up beside him, her gaze lingering on the crowd of reporters who had gathered around the entrance. The flashing cameras, the microphones shoved in every direction. It was all too familiar, and yet it felt like something had changed. "You okay?" Tasha asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of concern in her eyes. Elijah let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know. I've been fighting my whole life for this. But now that it's over, I don't know what comes next." Tasha gave him a soft smile, a rare moment of warmth in the cold aftermath of the fight. "You're not alone in this, Eli. You never have been." He turned to look at her, his gaze tired but grateful. "I know, but the world doesn't stop just because I want to fight. The media's already spinning it. They're already looking for the next angle, the next story. They don't see me, they just see what they want to. They always will," Tasha said, her voice firm. "But what you do with it, how you handle it, that's on you." Elijah nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I can't keep playing their game. I don't want to be the angry black man. I don't want to be their token, their stereotype. I just want to fight. I want to fight for the right reasons, for my future, for my family, for my own peace." Tasha placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. "Then you fight for that, for you, not for them." He turned back toward the chaos outside, the buzz of the media never fading. They had already begun to spin the victory, calling it a clean knockout, but hinting at his raw emotion, casting doubt on his ability to control himself in the future. As much as he wanted to turn away from it all, Elijah knew he couldn't. Not yet. Not until the narrative shifted. Not until he made sure they knew the truth. "What happens now?" he asked, looking at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Tasha gave him a thoughtful look, a slight pause before she spoke. "Now you take control of the story. You're going to use this victory to do something bigger than you've ever done before. You've already shown what you can do in the ring. Now, it's time to show the world who you really are." Elijah took a deep breath, a small spark of determination igniting in his chest. "Show them who I really am." It wasn't going to be easy. The world wasn't going to change overnight, and there would be days when it felt like everything was stacked against him. But he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let anyone define him by their narrow expectations. "I'm ready," Elijah said, his voice quiet but strong. "Ready to take control of the future." Tasha smiled, a proud look in her eyes. "That's what I want to hear. Let's make sure you're in the driver's seat from now on.